Too many mics. All right. So last up, save the best for last, we have Krys Freeman, who's one of today's rising entrepreneurs, technologists, and visionaries, a firm believer in technology as a vehicle for radical change. Krys seeks out projects that stretch our imagination in order to tackle complex enterprise and civic challenges. She also has a mobile app in development called Hella Rides, which is exciting. So without further ado, here is Krys.
Hello. Okay, so it's a lot of acts to follow, but I will do my best to present in a great way. So my name is Krys, as you heard, and I am going to talk to you a little bit about Hella Rides, and then I'll get into my biggest mistake, which I think is a little bit interesting in the context of some of the things that folks have already said. Hella Rides is a project that I started officially probably last year, but I've been working on for the last 3 years, on and off in different iterations. And as you know, as startup entrepreneurs, it takes many iterations to get to the finish line. It started because I moved here from SoCal and lived in very deep east of Oakland and was traveling to Burlingame for my first job that I got here by public transit. It took me 2.5 hours each way. It was painful. And one of the things that I kept seeing when I was standing at the bus stop and the bus driver was driving past me and not stopping was also that I was seeing cars with one person in it. And I figured they probably were going the same way as me, maybe at least going some of the way. And I was like, dang, it would be awesome if I could just get in the car with them, and just go, because I was just going downtown Oakland to catch the BART. You know, I could go to the Coliseum, but it was a little bit out of the way. And I was just like, I wish I could do that. I wish we could do this on our phones. I could just be like, boop, boop, hey, I want to go downtown. You're going downtown. Let's go together. And, I let that sort of marinate for a while. And then at some point, I went to a hackathon and actually tried to make something like this come to life. So I worked with a team there, and we created an app called Beta Stop, which is less of connecting people to share rides and more of letting people give feedback on the bus rides. Because my experience was, one, buses sometimes wouldn't stop. Other times they wouldn't show up. Other times the bus driver was, cantankerous. Just a variety of experiences that were just not fun. And so I just wanted to give people a voice to be able to explain what's happening. Because while AC Transit has a survey, it's not user-friendly, it's not mobile responsive, although they just made a mobile version. But it just wasn't accessible to the folks that I saw on the bus every day. Folks are not sitting here trying to iPhone their way through this bus driver was mean to me. So we created an app where you could send SMS messages basically to the app and say, hey, this is the bus ID, this is what happened to me, whether it was good or bad. And I didn't want to make it just like a crank monster situation. I wanted to give people an opportunity to commend people who did well. But just using SMS, because I felt like that was, one, ubiquitous. Whether you have a smartphone or not, you can send a text message. But also, as part of the hackathon I was participating in, that was one of the goals, is to make it accessible to audiences that don't have access to broadband regularly. And so that's a long little background to sort of talk about the context I'm coming from with Hella Rides, is that I'm looking at populations that typically don't get the sort of attention that we see with other apps, like communities that are low income, communities that are working class, communities of color, et cetera. Folks that aren't the typical market for apps. And so Hella Rides came full circle in that I wanted to actually pursue the opportunity to say, hey, if you're in some area, I'm your neighbor, I'm going to work in the morning. If I'm going to work in the morning and I want to use the carpool lane, 2 of y'all can come in with me, and we'll go over and we'll make our way through, chipping on some of the toll, and let's just have a better experience, get there faster, reduce the number of people idling at the Bay Bridge. Things like that, not crazy, but not easy per se. Often I get the question, isn't Lyft or Uber already doing that? No, they're not, because it's $45 to go over the bridge in Uber. I know from experience. I'm not going to tell that story because that was a mistake as well. So, I've talked to people about this idea over the years, and, always the skeptics, questions about Uber, questions about Lyft, how can you do that? Or, why are you doing that if these things already exist? And what I came to at some point is well, it's similar, but it's not. It's very much a different sort of avenue through which to solve a problem, which is getting people off the road, out of their cars, but also not jumping the gun and saying, oh, we're just gonna all just get out of our cars now, because I don't think that's realistic. We wanna get people to use their automobiles more efficiently, but you have to, crawl before we walk. My feeling about what my biggest mistake was is thinking that my entrepreneur story had to sound like someone else's. I see that happening in terms of the sorts of people that I'm trying to attract and people that I want to use the app. People are like, well, are they going to pay for that? Do you have income for that? Because the thing is, you want to find people that can pay for the product that you have. But if people are paying for BART and paying for their car and paying for gas, they can probably chip in $1 or $2 for a trip across the bridge. Also, just thinking about the fact that in this space, I am a little bit of an anomaly. And that's like the elephant in the room, but I didn't expect to be in this room when I started thinking about this process. And I don't often see people who look like me in rooms that I'm in talking about my apps. And for a while, I spent a lot of time trying to fly under the radar. I'd go to events and my hair wouldn't be quite as big. And I wouldn't be as comfortable being me in those spaces because I was trying to fit a mold or feel, more accessible to the people around me and trying to, just make everybody else feel more comfortable rather than sort of just being who I am. Because typically when I've shown up now as Krys Freeman, people are like, oh, you're nice, I like you, you've got good energy. And that sort of thing came full circle because people remember me, mostly because of the hair, but also because of the idea, I think. And I think that sort of thing, I don't know when it changed, but I know that when it did change, it changed my perspective on how I approached the app. I'm still a little bit gun shy about talking about it to people, but I'm a little bit less so than I was before because every time I do tell someone about it, they're like, wow, that seems like a really logical, cool idea. What are some of the pitfalls you have? And actually want to engage me in conversation about it. Whereas before, if I was being the person that I used to be, I wouldn't have been able to even have those conversations, which is going back to your points earlier. I guess all that to say is I think as a mistake, the learning lesson I've gotten from that is that you should really take hold of what your specific, what makes you you and what makes your idea resonate with the people you're trying to serve. I have this thought about product market fit that always comes up in my head. I'm like, when you talk about it in terms of who you're serving, people resonate more with it because they're like, oh, this idea is great, but who is the person that's gonna receive it? And that's constantly where I'm thinking about how to leverage this idea that I've had into something that can be real in the world. So that's my story. And I welcome any questions you have.
All right. Who has some questions for Krys? Anybody?
No pressure.
Come on. We need to end with some tough questions. Nobody has one?
Don't do that to me.
No? Oh, there we go. Whoa. Questions from the other panelists. Serious.
So first of all, I really enjoyed your talk, and I love how you were talking about targeting markets that aren't typically considered as sexy markets to target. So my question for you is, have you thought about how you could introduce this in low-income, underserved populations, and how will you navigate? I don't know if I necessarily see it as a technology barrier, because a lot of my underserved patients all had iPhones, inevitably.
Yeah. So I typically am talking to people about it, whether I'm at a bus stop, which is not as often lately because I just avoid the bus altogether. I'm like, I have a bike, I'm gonna get some cardio in, yay. A lot of the ways that I've sought out potential clients are on the internet. So I'm looking at people who are doing this already or trying to do it already. So I have a couple of different ways that I'm sort of sourcing information. So I have an automation setup where I'm pulling tweets from Twitter that are saying AC Transit in it, saying AC Transit in late, saying BART in late, just looking at the common complaints that come up. And I have thousands of tweets. It's kind of hilarious and also really sad because, AC Transit's like, oh, fill out our form. And I'm like, that form though, nobody wants to fill out that form. On top of the fact that I filled out the form when I first got here because they had just started their pilot of the GPS program where they were showing when the bus would come and the time, the ETA. and the bus that I was actually using went to the Coliseum BART, didn't have GPS on it. So I had no idea when it was coming out. The schedule was always wrong. And I'm like, but this goes to a BART. So it's kind of imperative that we should have this. So I filled it out. It took them 2 months to call me back. They have a little checkbox. Do you want someone to call you back about this? And I was like, yeah. And then 2 months later, I'm like, wait, what? What are you calling me about? Oh, didn't even remember that I had sent it. So that's one of the ways that I go about it. I also kind of creep Craigslist a little bit. So I pull all of the, not all of them, but specifically the rideshare posts that come up. And I have like a spreadsheet, so I've been manually trying to like match people. And I haven't actually reached out to them because I'm trying to find a tactful way to like say, hey, I saw your Craigslist post. Here's somebody else that's got a Craigslist post. They're going your same way. You want to ride with them? You should email them here. And I know it sounds a little sketchy. But at the same time, like, they're already posting it to the public. They're putting it out there. If I send a like email that says, hey, these 2 things came up, go check out the Craigslist post. It's not as creepy as being like, hey, my name's Krys, you should ride with such and such. Like, so I'm trying to find ways to sort of bridge the gap between, you know, people who are sort of engaged in the process already, but also sort of, they're the target market. They're just not like everyone quite yet. Because I want to focus on particularly people coming from the East Bay going to San Francisco and then going back home. And I've gotten a lot of interest from folks like up in Richmond, even in San Francisco, in the Valley. When I pitched it at Lesbians Who Tech, people were like, bring it to Austin, bring it to Portland, bring it to Boston. You know, so I know that there's an interest in it, but I'm trying to be a little bit measured about sort of approaching it like with a target market that seems sizable enough, but also manageable for just me and like the people that say they're interested in helping out with it. Hopefully that answers the question.
We got 2 more over here.
Okay, so I know you mentioned that a lot of the feedback you get a lot of the time is, you know, like you said, Lyft, Uber, you know, it's going to happen. So what would you say is the best advice you could provide somebody who necessarily is thinking of something that's in a similar market, in a similar target market, but not necessarily the exact same product? Because I know a lot of times that can be a lot of our downfalls, is that, you know, you have this great idea and you think of, there's this other alternative that's not necessarily the same thing, but it's similar. So what advice would you offer somebody, you know, who would kind of feel like that some of the time?
Are you saying like someone that has a product that there's a
has a
similar
product idea in the sense that, you know, there is a similar product out there, but it is not the exact necessarily product that you are providing?
It's one of the questions that I've had to ask myself a lot and really just dig in. How similar is it? And how is the target market I'm looking at being addressed? Are they addressing my target market, and should I just sort of throw my hands up with it? I feel like it's just really about digging into what your goal is really and looking at this other product. Like, for instance, I don't know how many of you follow the ride-sharing network, but there are so many out there. I have like all the apps on my phone. Hitch is one of the apps that's similar to Hellorides. It only operates in San Francisco. And it reiterates the need for something that crosses the barrier, because I think there's a lot of sort of bifurcation, like people over here and people over there. Like, I don't come to San Francisco very often, but at the same time, there are people that do this every day. So when I saw Hitch and people are always sending me things like, oh, Lyft Line and Uber Pool are here. How are you? Are you okay? Like checking on me, like, are you losing your mind? I'm like, no, I mean, great. Somebody's trying to solve this problem. Other people are trying to solve this problem. I think it's important not to think about this in terms of scarcity. Like, the more people that are solving this problem, the better for all of us it is, because there's more cars off the road. If I'm doing it in my little niche in Oakland, cool, because not a lot of startups are doing their thing in Oakland, and that, I feel like, gives me room to actually excel. But for me, like, every time that happens, I literally just go look at what they're doing and sort of, oh, you know, great. Like, I give them, you know, kudos. I'm like, I've tried to like track the guys down and be like, hey, because they used to be called Corral. So like I found out about them and I was like, oh, like I was really excited for them actually. Because I don't think it's a scarcity thing. If someone beats me to the punch, I have ideas for days. This is the one that I've been passionate about, and so I've stayed with it regardless, because I feel like it's still not quite being addressed. Like there's still a little room that is still not filled.
All right, there's one more. Somebody else back here had a question, I thought? Oh.
You mentioned about the creep factor. How do you get over that? I mean, for something like Uber, obviously one can pretend that you're the driver and one can pretend that you're a passenger. But for something like Hello Rides, you're pretty much bringing somebody into your car and you're a private individual. You can't pretend that you're like a taxi driver. Or like it's some psychological sense, right? How do you do that?
Well, and that's part of the reason why the app sort of is intended to exist, because people already do this. They do it in casual carpool. And it's creepier because you have no idea who this person is. You don't know their name. You might not get their license plate when you get in the car. And you sit there in silence because that's part of the etiquette of casual carpool. You do not talk unless the driver talks to you. So, and when I tell people that, they're like, oh, well, I can't do that, but I'll do Hella Rides. Like, comparisons, like, oh, shades of gray. But part of the idea is the things about Hella Rides that are like Uber and Sidecar and Lyft and Hitch and et cetera is that we're trying to provide reduce the amount of anonymity that is there. So you're a private person, but you could have just went to casual carpool and picked me up just as much as you could have went to Hella Rides and said, hey, I want to ride with you, girl. So, Sorry. I'm a little punchy. It's late in the evening.
Okay. I think that is a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Krys. That was great. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for the speakers for being here. Those were super, super fun. I feel like I learned a lot. We're going to have sort of networking and drinks for another 15, 20 minutes. So feel free to corner them and ask them all of your other questions that you didn't get asked now. Big thank you again to Galvanize for giving us this awesome space. We're going to have video from the event later, and we'll upload that so you can share it with your friends who weren't here. And also thank you to Start Out and Lesbians U Tech for helping us find such amazing speakers. And we should have another event within the next 2 to 3 months, so check your email. The next one should be fun. We're going to try to get hopefully Dave McClure to be here and some other people, so we'll see. So thank you for being here. We're going to have drinks, like I said, for 15, 20 minutes, so feel free to hang around. Thanks so much.